Welcome back to the news at 10. After 4 months of serious politicking, the president has signed the budget into law, calling it Budget of Change. Now, all attention is shifting to implementation of the budget and how best can this be done. So joining me now on the news at 10 is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you so much, Mr. Yusuf, for joining us once again.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
I remember the last time you were here, you were one of those who were not happy about the passage and the time it was taking. It's been passed now. Are you happier now?
Of course we are. Of course we are, because the delay impacted adversely on the confidence of investors. But now that the budget has been signed and we are eagerly waiting for implementation, the first thing is that at least it will lift investors' confidence. There are also expectations that, the challenges we have with infrastructure, because the last time the Minister of Works, Power and Housing was speaking at a forum in Lagos, he did say that because the budget had not been signed, his ministry has not been able to do much. So now that the budget has been signed, we are expecting some impact in the area of infrastructure.
All right.
The same thing with abandoned projects. We also have expectations, positive expectations with regard to contractual areas. We have positive expectations with regard to even liquidity in the economy, because the economy has been down and we need some stimulation. And we are hoping that the budget, at least to some extent, will help to stimulate the economy and increase the momentum and tempo of economic activities.
The government, they're talking about implementation, have said that it won't be business as usual, and they've listed 6 key areas as their template for implementing the budget. Let's just look at a few of them. Governance, they've talked about streamlining spending as regards governance in a transparent way. How do you think that will work out?
Well, it will work out well if the will to make it happen is there. Because what is important at this time is to have an implementation framework that will allow for the fast tracking of the entire process, particularly with regard to capital spending. Because when we talk about implementation, the key area or the major areas in which we normally have issues is the capital budget, roads, and similar things like that. So if we have the proper implementation framework that will reduce the bottlenecks that has to do with, the tendering for contracts, the processing contracts, awarding the contracts, release of funds, all those bureaucratic bottlenecks. Those things constitute major impediments to implementation. And with the kind of will and the kind of commitment, and also in appreciation of the fact that Nigerians are even getting impatient in terms of what they expect from this administration, I'm sure that the implementation framework will be such that we allow for an acceleration of all these processes, so that the dividend and the benefits that the citizens expect from the budget will be realized.
Let's look at another one that might interest you. Diversification through industrialization. There are a number of points they've raised there, and one of them is launch a Made in Nigeria campaign.
Well, it is good to launch a Made in Nigeria campaign, and it's also good to talk about diversification. But when we talk about budget is about appropriation. It's about spending. When we talk about industrialization, diversification, and the rest of them, it is more about policy. So there's a policy dimension, there's an appropriation dimension. The budget is addressing appropriation. And don't forget, we have a budget of about 6 trillion, capital provision of about 1.6 trillion. We have an economy of the size of 100 trillion. So you can see the size of the budget, the size of the capital, proposed capital spending, and the size of the entire economy. So it's not as if this budget will bring any major transformation. So we need to also manage expectations in that regard. What will make a bigger impact is to have the right kind of policies that will expand the space for the private sector. I just listened to the governor of Ogun State now. He's talking about creating an enabling environment. And that is what the government should focus on. The budget is important, but in terms of materiality, in relation to the problems that we need to solve, particularly infrastructure deficits, the right kind of policies is very, very critical. We are talking about policies with regard to public-private partnership, for instance, that will expand the space for the private sector to make the kind of contribution that will also contribute to the progress of this economy. So the policy issue is very, very critical. Also, policy issues around the foreign exchange, that is also very critical. Policy issues around the petroleum, oil and gas sector. All these things are very critical to create the space for the private sector to also make the desired contribution to the progress of this economy.
For you as DG of the LCCI,
Yes.
what is the most important thing you would like to see for that participation to be able to kick off?
Well, what we like to see is a policy environment that will expand the space for the private sector to play more role in infrastructure delivery. Because infrastructure deficit is so huge, and infrastructure is the biggest challenge that businesses are facing with regard to productivity, with regard to efficiency, with regard to even sustainability of investment. So there has to be, better policy environment to encourage, more private sector investment, both from within the country and from outside the country.
All right. Director General.
That is the way we should look at it. Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you so much, DG of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf, for sharing your thoughts with us on the news at 10 tonight. Thank you. Now, the plight of the Bakassi people in Cross River State in their new home seems to bring back memories of their displacement from their original homeland. About 90% of their children are believed to be malnourished, and the Cross River State government is calling for intensified efforts towards their rehabilitation. The State Director General of the Healthcare Development Agency, Dr. Pt.3, says the people need adequate attention to enable them live normal lives.
It's over 3 years since these displaced Bakassi indigents have been clustered in this environment following their eviction from their ancestral home. Children, youth, the aged have had to endure the harsh conditions in this environment which lacks basic amenities. The children are malnourished, the aged seeking medical attention. Worried at their plight, the Cross River State government has sent health workers to them to test and treat them for various ailments.
They are in a terrible state, and sincerely it's unfair for a people that were driven out of their land and their resources, their means of livelihood taken away from them. It's sincerely unfair. We're calling on the federal government to please revisit the issue of Bakassi and please provide for the people of Bakassi.
While they appreciate the state government's intervention, they're also seeking more support from the federal government.
Give our mother food, provide medical care. That conditional cash transfer of 5,000 for least privilege, trying to pay them. At least give us a handwork. We know how to work. In any area that you need us, we will not disappoint Nigeria. We'll be able to work, even though in the farm, in the sea, we are ready to work. But provides us the means of working. We will be able to feed ourselves.
In the meantime, the state government says it would continue to attend to the immediate needs of these displaced ones, pending when a permanent solution is found to their plight.
From there, we switch gears. Let's take a look at some business news for the day. Here's Anne Waudu.
You first. First Bank.
Hello and welcome to Business News. Nigerians may have to brace up as the federal government hopes to find a lasting solution to the lingering fuel crisis. Now, feelers coming from the federal government has it that it is considering the possibility of deregulating the downstream sector. According to Premium Times, and an NNPC official who spoke to Channel's officials on the same issue, government wants to avoid a recurrence of the break in supply, and it is open to multiple options which may affect cost. Now, any last-minute change in plans, the federal government may in a few days introduce policy changes that will usher in the full deregulation of the downstream sector of the Nigerian petroleum industry. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria has given customers of deposit money banks and stakeholders the assurance that the banking industry remains very strong and sound, and that the regulator will not allow the system to be used as a conduit for illicit transactions. The CBN statement comes against the backdrop of the recent spate of investigations and arrests of some bank officials by the anti-graft agency, the EFCC. The acting director of communication of the CBN, Mr. Isaac Okorafor, says that the bank is carrying out its own special investigations to determine the veracity of some of the allegations and the persons that may be involved. The government is being advised not to allow the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, that's AMCON, to be weighed down by the 5.3 trillion naira debt the agency has been trying to recover from its debtors over the last 7 years. Speaking today on our program, Business Morning, financial and management consultant Mr. Oji Udemezwe outlines a number of areas in which AMCON can be supported to fulfill its statutory function on debt recovery.
When AMCON came out with its strategy of buying over those debts, they phased them. So what you saw was a gradual growth in the bad or toxic asset size because of the phased implementation of the asset purchases. So it was phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Cumulatively, we're talking about bad debts, well, excluding accruing interest, maybe somewhere around 5.3, 5.6 trillion. In fact, if you have to, of course, interest continues to accrue. And if you look at that, that's almost, 50% of the country's total debt stock. And mind you, if these debts are not recovered, they'll automatically become, an addition to the country's, total debt stock. And that's dangerous. Looking at where we are today, a budget that's also going to depend on a lot of borrowing, and then you're adding this to it. So AMCON must succeed.
The Nigerian Ports Authority is projecting a total of $1.8 billion in revenue generation for the year. The managing director, Mr. Habib Abdullahi, confirmed the forecast to Channel's business editor, Bosin Omofaye, in an exclusive interview. According to him, a strategic partnership on exports and other initiatives are all expected to help achieve this figure.
I'm trying to see if we can raise about 1.8. If we can surpass that, then that will be good. $1 billion.
You sure you can make that?
Yeah, if the economy improves, why not? We can even be much higher than that. It all depends on the economy. As I said, anywhere in the world, port is reliant on imports and exports. What we are trying to do is to assist in diversifying revenue sources. And one of it is to see if we can try and ginger up in terms of export earnings. And we are trying to partner with the other sector of the economy, like Ministry of Agriculture, the Export Promotion Council, all these places we have written to them so that we have empty containers in the ports.
The Nigerian equities got off on positive starts this week, up by 59 basis points at the close of transactions. Here is Temple Ashaju with the details.
Hello and welcome to Stock Market Reports. Stocks got off to a positive start, sustaining the bullish trend seen last Friday by 0.5% to close the benchmark index at 25,828.30, while the total market value rose to 8.88 trillion naira. Now, strong appetite across the sectors boosted the turnover volume to about 60 million, exchanged for 6.44 billion naira in 3,655 deals. 28 advancers outweighed 20 laggards, and Unilever topped the counters with 10.24% gains ahead of Eternal Oil and Transcorp. GlaxoSmithKline, Cadbury and Burger Paints led the declines of the day by about 5% each. Off-the-floor strategic trading of over 2 million shares of Ecobank Transnational Incorporated worth 4.75 billion naira places the stock ahead of Access Bank and Transcorp on the top trades list. And that's the Stock Market Report. I'm Temple Ashaju.
Thank Thank you, Temple. Now, stock markets around the world also closed Monday in mostly mixed outing on weak Chinese data concerns and fallen oil prices. Let's see the figures. Thank you for watching. That's Business News Tonight. I'm Anne Umawodo. Ijama will be back with the rest of the news at 10.
You first. First Bank.
The trade train services system will soon receive a boost in the country following the commencement of the scheduled trade train services, which will ease movement of goods and services from one state to another. The managing director of the Nigeria Railway Corporation, who announced this during his visit to the eastern district of the corporation in Enugu, also gave assurances of tackling the challenges of commencing train services along Enugu-Ehamufu axis, where major economic activities take place. Still ahead on the news at 10, CAF fines Nigeria $5,000 for overcrowded stadium during the Africa Cup of Nations qualifier against Egypt in Kaduna State. That's beyond sports. Do stay with us.